Welcoming Ibra Army, and welcome back to another IBRACORP video. Thank you for coming in today, and as you have probably been following, this is the next episode in our TrueNAS series based on Proxmox, TrueNAS Scale, and Ubuntu for our virtual machines. If you've been following us through to now, thank you very much for following through the series. Really appreciate you guys coming and checking it out. I think it's very important that we clarify that there is many ways that we can implement these setups, and there's many ways to implement ZFS. And there are a couple of questions from the previous videos that I will address in this one so that we can help all understand each other on where this is going. So as you might have guessed, today's video is now covering the next stage, or the second last stage, but possibly the most important one, which is the installation and setup of TrueNAS Scale. Now, TrueNAS Scale is a hyperconverged storage that scales up or out. It's integrated Linux containers and VMs. You can deploy it as a single node or cluster. It's designed for hybrid clouds, and it has enterprise support options coming soon. Okay, and this is on their main website. We've got a whole bunch of features, roadmaps, resources, and we'll cover all that shortly. So if you're interested in the next episode of this series and trying to understand a little bit more about TrueNAS Scale and how you can apply it in your environment, then this is going to be the video for you. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it. Okay guys, so welcome back. And while we're on this screen here on their main website, we'll discuss a couple of things first that are going to help address some of the questions you might have or might have already asked. And this will help us give a baseline understanding of where we're at and why we've decided to go with this route. So firstly, one of the main questions that we have been getting is, why TrueNAS? Okay, fair enough. TrueNAS has excellent storage systems inbuilt. It's ultra solid ZFS implementation. It's got enterprise class server for free, and you can purchase support contracts. It's also got a fairly large community, which is always a great thing when you're looking for help or resources. And quite frankly, it's much better at storage than Proxmox. Okay, so one of the comments that we did see is, why do this in TrueNAS when you can do it straight in Proxmox? And that's a valid question. Quite definitely, you can do a lot of this in Proxmox. Proxmox supports ZFS, and it lets you set that up natively on the host, which is fantastic. So that's a valid option, and that's something you can definitely do. We're just trying to provide an alternative option, something outside of the box maybe. And in this scenario, the TrueNAS Scale handles ZFS fantastically. It's really good. It's a very solid foundation there. So then the next part is, why do we have Proxmox? Well, on the opposite scale of things, no pun intended, Proxmox is much better at handling virtualization. It's almost the king of it, to be quite honest. And that could be debatable. A lot of people do enjoy using things like ESXi. We've got the XCPNG as well out there now. There's a whole bunch of different other tools that you can use. So by all means, those are also valid options. But in our scenario, we're just doing our build. This is the IBRACORP build, and it's always open to change. The other thing is, we can only cover so much in a single series or a single video. Mind you, this series is a new idea. So moving forward, we would love to hear your feedback. Be sure to drop it in the comments and join our Discord and let us know there on different builds you would like to see, and we can also do videos on them as well. So maybe if you have, TrueNAS and XCPNG or something, or just XCPNG, something like that, let us know. We would love to cover that in a video in future. So going back to Proxmox, it's much better for virtualization. There's virtually no limit to the number of drives or storage size. Okay, and that's really important, especially when we're virtualizing a lot of virtual machines. Now the next question is, why ZFS? ZFS ensures that data is always consistent on the disk using a number of techniques, including what's known as COW, or if you break it down, copy on write. What this means is that when data is changed, it is not overwritten. It is always written to a new block and checksummed before pointers to the data are changed. So ZFS is an advanced file system, and as such it has some interesting features. So with ZFS you will get pooled storage, copy on write, snapshots, data integrity verification and automatic repair, RAID Z, a maximum of 16 exabyte file size, and a maximum of 256 quadrillion zettabytes of storage. So those are a couple of things that it will allow us to have. And I can go into those in a little bit more detail, but I really recommend that you check out more about ZFS in the background. There are videos designed to explain ZFS. If we try to do it all here, look, it's going to take too long, all right? But there are plenty of resources that we can get to. But here's some other important notes that are going to be related to our build. So RAID Z1 and RAID Z2. You might be asking what they are, because we will cross them as well. RAID Z1 means 1 disk parity. RAID Z2 is a 2 disk parity. Now currently you might have an operating system that is using RAID and you might have a parity disk. You may have multiple parity disks. With the Z2 and Z1, so obviously if you have Z1, you have 1 parity. If a drive dies and fails, then that's fine, you can still rebuild. But if you have a second drive die and fail at the same time, then you could be in a little bit of strife. With Z2, we have 2 parities. That really gives us a lot of confidence in securing our data. You then have L2 ARC, and that's basically going to be our cache, and NVMe is preferred, and we showed that in the earlier videos, and we'll show it today. If you're interested, we'll drop a link down below for some more in-depth videos about that. And there are plenty more guides and videos on planning ZFS configs, so like I said, we can't cover them all, so we hope you can find some resources. And if you do find some good ones, share them back to us in our Discord. We'd love to see them there too. Now, importantly, Z2 is always better if you can spare 2 disks, okay? So keep in mind, you're gonna lose, and I say that in quotations, we're gonna lose 2 disks of storage to go to parity. But the reason is, if you lose 1 disk, it is possible to lose another disk during the rebuild, okay? So if you can spare 2 disks, I recommend you do that. Now, one limitation that we need to clear up, make sure you understand now, is that the disks need to be the same size drive per VDEV. And we'll explain that a little further down the line. But you can have different VDEVs. So if you create another VDEV, you can have different size disks in there, put them together and, sort it out that way. But the ZFS redundancy happens on the VDEV level and not on the pool level, okay? That'll make more sense once we start getting into it. This is a really important part of this video, guys, because obviously we've been getting a lot of questions about it. So I'm trying to address those here and just get that done. And then we can move into the installation, setup, etc. like we normally do. So probably one of the most important questions that we've been getting is why TrueNAS as a VM on Proxmox? You could have 1 server with Proxmox and 1 server with TrueNAS and get exactly the same result that we are going to show in our demo and have shown in our demo. However, there are advantages to have Proxmox and TrueNAS to share the same server. Ultimately though, it's really up to you. Also, this is not a one-way street. The way we'll show you, it is simple to split up the 2 operating systems at any time. So if you guys decided to try this first, you wanted to virtualize TrueNAS, so you didn't have to install it on a host machine, then you can move it over later. That's the beauty of it. The other thing is, since we run them on the same server, there's no network speed limit between Proxmox and TrueNAS that you would have had if you had them on separate bare metal servers. Okay guys, so with a couple of those questions answered, we're gonna start getting into the actual install now. And if I miss any of the questions you guys might have, please let us know. We can't see them all sometimes, we miss things. And just something to correct myself on before we move on from last week's video, I believe it was, regarding Proxmox. A user mentioned that I did make a mistake, and so I definitely want to address that. I said that during the backup process, using backups in Proxmox, I called it snapshotting. That is actually incorrect. I misspoke there. Obviously, I was quite tired, but thank you to that user for bringing it up. That is not a snapshot. We were taking an entire backup each time. So a snapshot will only back up the differences in the files, whereas the backups that we were talking about last week in Proxmox back up the entire machine as it is each time. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so we're on our Proxmox server now, and this is basically where we left off last week. If you watched our last video on Proxmox, you should be up to speed with where we're at. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check. So now that we're on the server, we are going to get started with the installation. The first thing we have to do is prepare. So we're going to prepare for the install. And I want you guys to keep in mind that the TrueNAS scale that I actually have running in live in production is using live disks. So I'm just going to demonstrate that to you now. I'll show you this is our live environment for TrueNAS scale, and it's in operation currently. So it's in production, this one. Because I'm passing through real disks and things like that to here, some of the steps are going to be different during the install for demo purposes only. But I will explain what those are so that you know what to pass through on your actual system if you're going to be doing this setup. First things first, we want the ISO. So head over to the TrueNAS Scale website, either copy the link for the ISO or download the ISO to your computer and then upload it to our ISO location in Proxmox. Again, we covered all this in the Proxmox video. Once we have the ISO in there, we're pretty much ready to install it and get it going. So let's head over to our node and we'll create a VM. And for this, I'm just going to name it TrueNAS Video. Now, I'm not sure if I covered this in last week's video or not, but some extra tip for you here as we're going along, the startup and shutdown order. So we can set the startup and shutdown order of the virtual machine. So we can say TrueNAS Video, we want that to start up 4th. I'd have to look at the other ones to see what they are, for example, but let's say 4th, for example. And the startup delay is how long after this VM starts before it executes the next startup. So we can say 30 seconds. And this is very useful if you have a system that is depending on other systems. In this scenario, we would always want our TrueNAS virtual machine to start up first immediately, because all of our other setups rely on this storage being available. So I would definitely probably put this as 1. And I'd probably give it maybe 60 seconds just to be sure everything's up and running and that our shares are being published. So once that executes, then everything else can start up after it. So we've set that up, go ahead and click next. Keep in mind, we've checked the box here to show advanced as well as we go along. For the ISO image, we'll go click on that, click on TrueNAS Scale. There's our ISO image. The type and the version can remain as Linux, and the version is on the latest, which is 5 to 2.6 kernel. And click next. So under system, we can leave pretty much all of this. One thing I do suggest only for the TrueNAS installation is you can check the QEMU agent box. And the reason is it's actually already got the guest tools installed on TrueNAS. So this will allow us to start that up and allow Proxmox to communicate with the virtual machine better. However, other virtual machines, when you're setting them up, it's best to leave it unchecked unless you know for sure, of course, that it's got guest tools already. Because what can happen is if you check it and you start up the virtual machine, the commands for restart and shutdown in Proxmox sometimes won't work because it's unable to communicate with the agent. So you're best off leaving it unchecked, do what you need to do, get the guest tools installed, and then, check it and restart the virtual machine. With that, we'll click next. And then it takes us to our disks, arguably the most important part here. Keep in mind, guys, that if we are going to be passing through a HBA card, you don't need to add a whole bunch of disks here. We do need a boot disk though. So for our demo purposes, we're gonna set up a boot disk of 50 gig. So I encourage you guys to do that as well. So you want a boot disk, virtual disk set up at 50 gig. Now, what are the benefits of having the V disk? It's going to give us snapshots and backups, and only a small amount of space is needed. So the rest of it will be on your array once TrueNAS is set up. And if there's a demand in future, if you guys are interested, we can show you how to use a single NVMe drive as boot, cache, and S-Log device for TrueNAS. Now, we know for a fact in my scenario that the main disk for Proxmox is on an SSD. So I'm going to check SSD emulation. I'm also going to add 4 more disks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll give them a size of 200 gig. Now remember, this is simply for us to simulate what it's going to look like for you. If you are passing through a HBA card, you wouldn't be adding these in. This is just so we can make up an array, if you will, of disks. Okay, but normally if you're passing through disks raw straight to TrueNAS, then you only have the boot disk we need to set up here. So with this, if we look down, we've got all the same size, keeping in mind, again, that ZFS requires the same size disks. Another important note is that you need at least 3 disks, especially if you're going to be setting 2 to parity. You want at least 4 in that scenario. So try and go for 4. If you have more than that, by all means, go for it. They just have to be the same size. Once you're all done here, click next. And it's going to take us to our CPU. For the CPU, under type, go all the way down and select host. We want to pass through the actual host CPU. Now with the cores and sockets, that's obviously dependent on yourself. I recommend about 6 cores. I only have 1 socket, so that stays at 1. But I reckon about 6 cores has been doing fine. If you feel like you need it after reading stats, you can bump that up as well. If we don't need anything else in here, go ahead and click next. Now for the RAM, I suggest about 24 gig of RAM to keep yourself safe. I've noticed probably around up to 16 gig is the average. So giving it a little bit more is probably going to be the best solution anyway. And remember, we're talking in binary here. Sometimes if you just put in 24, for example, it may round it down or up depending on the nearest binary. So I like to put it in directly as is. So 24576, and then we uncheck ballooning device. So something else to note with the memory, that ZFS loves RAM. So better performance, the more you can give, as it's used for the cache functionality in our ZFS array. So if you have more you want to give it, by all means give it some more. It won't go to waste, that's for sure. Once you're done, go ahead and click next. Everything here can stay default. Go ahead and click next again. And that all looks good. Go ahead and click finish. And we're just going to wait for that virtual machine to be created pretty much. So for those of you guys who have a LSI or HBA card, we also need to pass that through to the virtual machine. So before you start up the virtual machine for the first time, go into options, go into hardware, click on add, select PCI device, use the drop down list and find your LSI controller. So here's mine, for example. Select all functions and then click on add. Now our virtual machine's ready. Let's start that up and then we'll click on console so that we can access the console to it. Okay, and here we are on the installation screen. So straightforward, let's go to install and upgrade. And here we can see our disks. Now this is asking us where do we want to install TrueNAS. So TrueNAS, the operating system. We are going to say we want it on our NVMe, for example. In our case, it's a VDisk here. So we want TrueNAS on that 50 gig VDisk that we created, and then go ahead and click OK. So this will say it's going to erase all data. That's fine. Click yes. And then we want to enter a password. We've created our secure password. You have the option to not set a password, but obviously that's not recommended. Go ahead and click OK. Now that was the installation part done. It's pretty much going to go ahead and start installing for us, and we'll pick it up once it starts up. Okay, so we can see that the install has completed and we're left on this message saying the TrueNAS installation on SDA succeeded. Please reboot and remove the install media. So this is going to be a really important trick for you when using Proxmox. Go ahead and click OK, and we're going to shut down the system, and we can close this, just allow time for that to shut down. We'll zoom back out now. Now while that's shutting down, we can go to options, go to hardware, for the CD DVD drive, go ahead and click edit, select do not use any media and click OK. So another trick is when you want to make these changes, you can make it at any time and it won't be applied until the machine restarts. So we've removed the install media now, and we can pretty much start it back up. So let's start it up now, and we're just going to check the console to see what it tells us. Now, if everything works correctly, we should grab a DHCP address, which is fine. So we'll just let that start up, and it should tell us what our address is that it's living on. Okay, and then we go. So it's 196 on our local subnet here. So let's close the console window. We don't need that anymore for the moment. Okay, so as you can see, we've gone to the address here, 196, as it said in the console, and you're going to be confronted with a login screen. So the username and password is, the username is root, and the password is the one we created during install, so go ahead and put that in. So congratulations, we have TrueNAS Scale up and running. Now, one thing important to remember with TrueNAS Scale, if you need to update it, always do it through the GUI, don't do it through the CLI. So do it through this menu here that you see, updates available, for example. Don't do it through anywhere else. Now the whole reason we're here is for our storage. So let's start there. Click on storage in the left hand side and it's going to tell us we don't have any. So go ahead and create a pool. Now for the pool, I recommend something similar to this sort of format. If you just click the question mark, you can see that it has to conform to some strict naming conventions. Now that I've given it a name, we can actually go ahead and suggest the layout. So we can tell it to tell us basically how we should set it up. So let's click on that. We'll see what it selects. So it's grabbed all of our disks that we have available. So we have all these disks available, and it automatically selected RAID Z2. Now, as I explained before, RAID Z2 will make 2 of these parity disks, which then leaves us with these 2 200 gig disks. And finally, at the end, it will tell you the estimated raw capacity. So if I was to go to just RAID Z or RAID Z1, we get that additional disk of space, but we lose that second disk of parity. And if I just click the question mark here, you have some of the other options as well. So we can use Stripe, which uses the entire capacity of the disk for storage and has no redundancy. Not what we want to achieve here today by using ZFS. It's not going to be using ZFS, it's just striping the data. A mirror will require at least 2 disks and mirrors the data from one disk onto each other disk in the VDEV, which can limit the total capacity. So we're essentially losing all of this space down to 200 gig. Okay, going by the size of each of one of the disks. So we're going to go with RAID Z2 to give you the example. Okay, remember this is going to give us the best protection, so we want to go with RAID Z2. Once we've created that, go ahead and click create, confirm it, and then create the pool. Now while that's setting up, something that I'd like to explain is that the array can be exported and imported into any operating system that supports it. Proxmox makes this even easier with virtualization. Another reason why we're doing this with Proxmox for those that have the question of why we're using Proxmox. Okay, we can essentially move this entire pool to another operating system that supports it. Okay, so now we have a pool, okay, successful pool here, that looks good, no dramas at all. The next thing we're gonna do is actually create a user, okay, and this is really important because we don't want to be using root, we want an isolated user. So go ahead to credentials and go to local users. So in here we can see we have root already, and a notice will come up saying all built-in users except root are hidden by default. Okay, we don't care, we don't need to see that right now. Go ahead and click add and start filling out the details. So I have our username, we have our password, we can put an email if we want as well. We then have our user ID. Now by default it's 1000. I would recommend you just leave it as 1000 unless you have a reason to change it. Scroll down further, you have some other options if you wanted to. Just make sure Samba authentication is checked. It seems like it is by default, but just check it just in case they change something in the future. Go ahead and click save. Now, in case you wanted to, you can also download an SSH public key as well. So go ahead and click save. So now we have a user and their UID is 1000. If we go to credentials, go to local groups, we also have a group there called psychotics with the GID of 1000. This is going to be important when we get to our Ubuntu installation. Now we want to give that user access to the pool and a data set underneath. So go back to storage and let's work through it together. So if you just click these 3 dots here and go to add a data set, you'll ask for a name and some comments. Okay, so let's say for here, for example, we'll call this data set media. Comments, media storage. Do we want to sync with it? Scroll down, we have other options, so ZFS dedupe, and by default it's on inherit, which is pulling it down as off at the moment. But ZFS deduplication, it will transparently reuse a single copy of duplicated data to save space. Deduplication can improve storage capacity but is RAM intensive. So again, really important to have enough RAM if you're going to be using a lot of these features. We're going to leave it off for the moment. Now we can also show more advanced settings as well, and if you scroll through you have all sorts of different things here that you can customize to your liking. Once you're done, go ahead and click save. So now you'll see we have pool 1 and we have a data set under there called media, and it inherits all the settings that it needs to from the pool itself up above. Okay, so let's say we've created that. That looks good. We have, 369 gig of space there. Excellent. Now I want to use that space. How do I do that? So the next thing we do is go to shares. So click on shares and you'll see Windows SMB shares here. Go ahead and click add. Select the path, and if you drop that down, you'll see the pool that we just created. So let's click that, and then let's click media. Your name here will say media, but I might just add TrueNAS video. You can select a purpose if you want to. I usually we'll just leave it as the default share parameters for now, and we won't need to put a description, but I recommend you do once you start adding a few so that you can keep track of what they're all doing. If we scroll down, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff here. You can allow guest access if you want to that share, but we're not going to need that because we've just created an authenticated user. So go ahead and click save. Now it's going to ask us, do we want to enable the service? Okay, because it was actually stopped. So go ahead and click enable service. Now we have SMB running and we have the TrueNAS share running as well. Now, some of the other comments and feedback that we got was why we're using SMB as opposed to NFS, as opposed to, whatever else, iSCSI. Guys, there is no perfect answer. There's many ways you can implement this. If you want to use NFS shares, you have the option right here. So by all means, turn it on and add one there if you like. Now, there is actually another setting we now need to do after setting up the share. So back on our storage page, under the media dataset that we created, click on there and go to view permissions. Now you'll see the permissions are actually set to root. So what we need to do is change that and change that to Psychotics, which is the user that we create. We want to apply that user. For the group, we'll do the same. Set that to Psychotics, apply the group. Apply the permissions recursively so that it goes down any folders that have already been created, and then go ahead and save. You can do it to any child datasets if you create any more underneath that. So go ahead and click save. And as I was explaining, you can add a dataset underneath a dataset, so you can tree them out if you want. So now we should have the correct permissions for our drive location. Okay, so we have a share running. We want to now actually use that share. How do we go ahead and do that? Now we're on our Windows machine here. Let's go ahead and map a drive. We'll go map network drive. Next, we'll drop that down, and now it's going to ask us for our credentials. Okay, so let's put in our credentials as the user that we created, and we'll let Windows save those credentials. Click OK. And sure enough, there's our share that we created. Let's click on the share, click OK, and finish that up. So our share is now visible. Now, if you wanted to, you could go, obviously in the File Explorer, go directly to the IP address of the server, and you'll see all the shares that might be visible to you. Let's go into here, and there we go. So we've basically got a share ready to go and ready to use for us. So in the share, I'm going to just pop in the pfSense ISO. We'll watch that copy across. There you go. Now, granted, that is only a 426 megabyte file, so nothing too crazy, of course, there. We're not entirely surprised by that. But the share is already set up and working. Now, it's important that you can also snapshot over to other servers and automate the synchronization and cloud upload. So I'll show you that here under data protection. We can have periodic snapshot tasks running. So go ahead and click add. Select the data set that you want to do it for. So we're going to say media. We're going to say 2-week lifetime is fine. Don't want it to do anything crazy. That's our schedule every day at 12 AM. Allow empty snapshots. We're going to uncheck that and click save. Now, what does that mean exactly? That's going to snapshot for us. So if you go to a file, for example, here in Windows, we have Windows again in our share, and we right click and we go to properties, and you go to previous versions. Now, with snapshotting enabled, depending on your schedule, of course, after a few days or whatever the case might be, we can come back here and we'll actually start to see different file versions. And you can allow it to restore from a previous version. Now, to replicate the environment that we currently use, we're going to create another data set in this pool, and we're going to call this vdisks. Leave all the same, go ahead and click save. Same thing applies for our permissions. We need to be able to change those. So go to view, scroll down, set it here and set it there and there. We apply that to the group and the user, and recursively is fine. Continue and save. Then we go back to shares again. We'll click add, we'll scroll down, we'll find that data set vdisks, and then we'll obviously just call it vdisks here as well and click save. Now you can share with all the other options. Per data set, only use one share service, okay? So we have a data set, which is called vdisks. We then create a share for vdisks. That's it. One per data set is the best way to go about it. Now you also have the flexibility to move vdisks around in Proxmox, which I'll show you once we get a VM up and running. But find what suits you best. For our demo, we're going to be using Samba. It's versatile and widely supported, but it's just to show you how easy and fast it is. So guys, with that part done, let's say we want to install a virtual machine now. Let's go back to Proxmox. And what we're going to do now is create a Windows 11 virtual machine. Now I'm going to show you that for two reasons. One is I'll show you the TPM function of Proxmox to show you how we can get around that common issue that people have with running Windows 11 virtualized. We'll show you how easy Proxmox makes that for us. The other reason is we're going to set up the shares in there, and we're going to show you how quick it can respond between that and our IBRANAS. And possibly the third thing is to show you the vdisks. We'll show you how to move the vdisks from one spot to another and how easy that truly is. Now, while the ISO is downloading for us, what we're going to do is go to Data Center and select Storage. Now we want to add a new storage, so go ahead and click add and select SMB and CIFS. So for the ID, I'm just going to call this vdisks video, okay, just so I can pick that out from my actual ones. For the server that we're going to be picking it from, we want to type in the address. So just put in the address, so 192.168.196, username, and our TrueNAS password. Now, if we select share, it will scan and pick up the 2 shares that we created. So let's click vdisks, for example. Now, what kind of content do we have in here? If we just drop that down, you can see you've got a whole bunch of different stuff. We just want disk images, okay? So leave it as disk images and click add. Now, if you look over in the left-hand side here for a second, you'll see that is creating the share for us. And this is feeding back into the virtual machine that we just created. So let's now go to ISOs, go to ISO images, and we'll upload the Windows 11 ISO there. This is the official ISO from Windows, from Microsoft, so it's accessible by the public. Okay, our ISO is uploaded. Now, just for the sake of having 2 separate locations, we're also going to add another SMB share on the same server, and we're going to call this one media-video. Server is the same, 192.168.1.196. Now, I didn't show you guys how to set static IP for that. I will show you in a moment, but we don't want to jump around too much. So I'll just get this part done and we can do that. And again, we select it. So we have this second area here, this second share created. And in this case, we want it also to be disk image too. So we're going to leave that as is, but you might have several different ones. You might have one for ISO like I do. You might have one for container templates, snippets, whatever the case might be. So we're going to leave that as is and click add. Now, while that's creating, we can now create our virtual machine. So up here, click on create VM, and we're going to call this Windows 11. Not going to bother with any of this stuff as well. Don't really care about startup and shutdown order. For the ISO, we've selected our ISO, so Windows 11. And in the type, we're going to go Microsoft Windows, and then you have 1122. So leave that as is and click next. Now, you will see because we selected Windows 11 here, that a lot of this stuff is already checked for us. So we don't even need to really worry about it, okay? EFI storage is going to ask us to select where we want that storage. I'm going to say I want it on our vdisks video location, which we created is our share on TrueNAS. And TPM storage, also going to put it in that same location. So vdisks video. Pre-enroll keys, EFI disk, all of that is all good. Click next. 132 gig disk, I might just say 50. Let's say 50 gig for example, that should be fine. Go ahead and click next. For the cores, why not? Let's give it 6 cores. Click next. For the memory, we'll say 8192. Click next. And we have our default interface card. That's fine as well. Click next and finish. Now there's one other thing we actually need to do. So what we're going to do is just stop that virtual machine. And if you're using Windows, what you want to do is download the VirtIO drivers. Now there's an official page from Proxmox that has it all laid out. And you basically download the ISO, add it in just like we did with any other ISO. And in here, we want to add that here. So go to CD and DVD drive, go to storage, wherever you keep your ISOs. And if you look down here, and it's provided by fedorapeople.org, so you can grab the ISO and upload it to your server. So I'll go to ISOs here and we'll go to upload, select the file, so VirtIO win, and upload that. Once that's done, go back to the Windows 11 machine here and we're going to add that CD drive. Go to the storage, ISO, and we have our VirtIO drivers and click create. We should have 2 CD drives. One is for Windows 11, the other one is for VirtIO. Click start and then quickly click console. If you have any issues starting it, make sure you go to options and then the boot order. And what we're going to do is make sure that the Windows 11 ISO starts first. Click OK. And then try and start it again. Now, if you're like me and you tried to start up the machine and you got an error like this one here, that's because of using IDE. We're only allowed 2 IDE devices when using Q35. So what I did was actually remove the disk. So I've stopped it, removed the disk. We've made that an iSCSI. So if you go to add hard disk, and you've got SCSI there rather than IDE. We've got that in the correct location. So it's on our new share. And the problem is though, we have TPM and EFI disks there as well. So what we're going to do is just remove that, and let's recreate the Windows 11 VM. So we'll go Windows 11, click next. The ISO image, we are selecting the Windows 11 ISO there. The type, Microsoft Windows and 11. The machine, Q35. QEMU agent we leave off. TMP storage, we'll go vDisk video, EFI vDisk video. We'll click next. Under here, vDisk video with a size of 50 gig. And instead of IDE, we'll go SCSI. Go ahead and click next. The cores, we'll give them 8 gig of RAM. Click next. We'll uncheck ballooning device. Click next. And that should be it. So go ahead and click next. We won't start it after creating, just finish up. And now in the hardware section, we'll click add CD DVD drive. The storage is our ISO, and we want to add the VirtIO ISO. Okay, this is going to be important, otherwise we're going to have trouble installing the drivers necessary. So click add. So we have 2 drives there, and we've got the disk. Once you're happy, go ahead and start it up. You kind of have to be a little snappy here, otherwise you might miss the press any key option. And if you do, just stop the VM and start it again and try and catch it. And here we are. So we're straight into the installer. Let's click next, click install now, and we'll just wait for that to go. Now, if you're familiar with Windows, you'd be used to this anyway. We will select I don't have a product key. This is just for demo purposes only. We go to Pro, for example, click next. I accept, click next. We go custom. And now, as you can see, it's not going to pick up any of our disks. That's fine. Click on load driver and browse, and you'll see VirtIOs there. So drop that down, go to AMD 64 and W11 and click OK. You'll see that it picks up the pass-through controller for us. Click next and just wait for it to install those drivers. So then this allows us to select our vDisk that we've created. So that's fine. Click next here and just wait for Windows 11 to install. Now keep in mind that the vDisk we're using for this is located on our TrueNAS virtual machine that we have running. Okay, so we can now restart. It's restarting. We're just going to click escape while it's restarting to escape into the menu here. And that will allow us to just quickly stop the virtual machine without it starting. Now that it's stopped, we'll go into the install files here and we'll remove the CD DVD drive for the installer. The next thing to check real quick is if we go to options and we go to the boot order, just edit that. And we just want to make sure that our disk is first, which it is. And you can just leave the rest as is. Go ahead and start it up again. Now, as you can see, we haven't had any issues to do with our TPM chip or anything like that. So Proxmox is taking care of that for us. And all we had to do was select the template. We didn't have to mess around with any sort of command line or trying to do any hacks to get that to work. It just works straight out of the box with the template that they provide us. So here we are, Windows 11 is starting up and it's going to take us through our usual install. Now I'm going to just skip through this, guys, and cut to where we need it to, because this is all kind of unrelated to TrueNAS itself. Okay, so we've set up our Windows 11 VM and I've gone in through RDP now so that we can just have a nice raw access to it. And we've got a benchmarking tool here. So we're going to be able to use this to check how how our speed's going using the storage. So let's go ahead and start that and see how we go. Now, as you can see with the results of that, I stopped it towards the end there, but our read and write is phenomenally quick. So we definitely aren't seeing any issues there. I actually expect it to be even quicker if we enable SSD emulation and cache write back. But that's a whole nother level. We probably don't want to do that with a Windows machine. But it's quite snappy, and this is a virtual machine that's running here. The disk itself is running on TrueNAS, and as you can see, it's pretty quick to navigate, to get around to stuff. We've got no issues whatsoever. We can get to our file locations. We've got our images there, and yeah, so that works great. The one thing we can actually do with Proxmox as well is move the disk of a VM to another location without taking the virtual machine down. I'll give you an example here. We have our Windows 11, and if we go to hardware and we go to the hard disk, you can see there is a move disk option. We'll select that and it will ask you where you want to target the storage. We'll drop down the list and we'll see the shares that we created. So I made this share here. This one was meant to be for media, but in our case, we're doing it for the video. So let's click on it. Make sure to tick delete source if you want it to be removed completely. If you don't, it will still exist on that location as well. Now for Windows, we didn't mention it before, but it's probably better off having a raw disk image as opposed to QCOW. So we'll even change that here, and it gives us the option to change it. Click on move disk. And as I mentioned in the Proxmox video, we can actually close this. It'll still be working, doing its thing. And that's how you move a disk. So now probably just the last few things to get you to understand here in TrueNAS. We'll show you a couple of things and then we'll wrap it up, I think. So let's go to reporting. And if we head to reporting, it gives you some really nice detailed information about what's happening. You can select from your disk, CPU, memory, network, etc., until you find any sort of bottlenecks or issues that you might have. We also have apps. Now, if you're familiar with apps, these are also known as catalogs, and these are, basically the app store of TrueNAS Scale. We have some of the developers actually in our Discord, so if you need to ask any questions about that, jump in. We have the TrueNAS charts guys in there to have a chat to as well. You got your reporting, you got all that. Probably one other thing you might want to set is a static IP address. So if you head over to Network tab, and you can go to the interfaces, select the interface there. You'll see IP addresses, aliases. So then I've gone to add, and we can add an IP address that we actually want it to stay on here as well. So guys, we'd like to hear from you. Let us know what your best setups are. Maybe we can pick them up in future if time permits and do videos on those sort of setups as well. We'd love to hear about it if you want to let us know in our Discord server. This series is being one of many options that we'll try to cover, the top few where we can. We're showing you what you can do with the flexibility of virtualization, and you can tailor it to the setup that works best for you. So if you think something else needs to change, you think it, could be improved, by all means, do it and let us know how you went about it so that we can try and understand more. So guys, that's our TrueNAS Scale installation ready to go. We've set up our media share, and we're now ready to then use it in our live environment. So in the next and final episode, we'll set up a Ubuntu virtual machine, maybe if time permits also an LXC container to compare the two, and we'll get some apps installed using Docker Compose and have it all linked up to share from our TrueNAS Scale ZFS array. And again, virtualization playing a big part there, because if we wanted to destroy our Ubuntu VM or it died, we could easily spin up another one with the same template and then just pull all the data across again from the share. So guys, I hope that answered some of your questions. If it didn't, be sure to let us know in the comments below and on Discord. Please like and subscribe to the video, because it really helps us out more than you could possibly think. We really appreciate you coming in and checking out the video. Thank you very much everyone for your support, and we can't wait to see you in the next IBRACORP video.